Welcome back everyone. I've just finished watching Barca's 3-0 win against Villarreal, and it felt like a strangely significant game, not just because it broke a run of poor Barca performances, but really because of Xavi's selection choices and how they changed the dynamic of this team. So today we're turning our usual analytical eye onto those choices to see exactly what was different, and more importantly, how significant they might be for the future of this Barcelona project. So if you like these analysis videos, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. I'm releasing in-depth tactical content every week. So with all that said, let's do it. Only a month ago, it seemed obvious that Barca's first choice front line would consist of Rafinha, Lewandowski and Dembele. But there have been question marks recently over the wingers, the number of errors and their decision making, so Xavi shook things up a bit by starting both of Barca's less traditional wide players in Ansu Fati and Ferran Torres, which really does have an impact on the team dynamic. But how, and is it better? First, we need to understand that the wingers' role doesn't happen in isolation. They're very much linked to the players around them, and in Xavi's Barca, the relationship with the fullback and the 8 is especially important. This triangle that I've alluded to before. So typically at any one time, one of them hugs the touchline, one operates in the half space, and one drops back to create, as well as to cover if Barca lose the ball. But while this structure is rigid, who actually takes up these positions should be fluid. And with players like Ansu and Ferran Torres as wingers, players that prefer to operate closer to the box, you're naturally getting to see a lot of rotation as they drift inside into that half space. The crucial thing is then that you have complementary profiles around them to take advantage when they do drift inside. And in this Villarreal game, we saw the absolute prime example of those complementary profiles working as intended. So for the first goal, you have Pedri as the deepest player, feeding the run of an overlapping fullback, while the winger drifts inside to take a man away, as well as become a goal threat in the box. But it's important to realise that what's changing here isn't the system itself, it's merely the mentality of the players and how they choose to attack. So taking the right side as an example this time, if we look at the heat map for Ferran Torres, in terms of his pass reception, you'll see a lot of activity on the touchline, not too dissimilar to a typical Dembele performance, for example. So this was the first game against Inter. What changes though is the player's decision making on the ball. So you can see Dembele is incredibly direct, making a lot of box entries with passes and carries, while Ferran is a lot more conservative, choosing to retain the ball and come inside more often, combining with his teammates. Obviously there are far less actions for Ferran on this graphic, but just looking at the direction of them tells a story. While this is less immediately threatening to the opposition, keeping the ball does give Barca longer possessions in the final third, and importantly, far fewer turnovers. Against Villarreal, Ferran had 50 touches, was dispossessed 13 times, and made 5 inaccurate crosses. While in that Inter game, Dembele had twice as many touches, but lost the ball 3 times as much, and made 4 times as many inaccurate crosses. So that's the first thing that changes with Ferran versus Dembele. He's just a little bit smarter in possession, and better chooses his moments of when to be direct and when to keep the ball. But the other thing Ferran Torres gives you, and this applies to Fati on the left as well, is the possibility for more variation in attack. So like we talked about, both are very comfortable in the half space, and both are natural runners as opposed to dribblers like Dembele and Rafinha, meaning you see more scenarios like this, where Roberto has gone wide as Ferran attacks the half space, or here with Ansu making a run in behind from the left wing. Variations we see pretty rarely when Dembele or Rafinha are on the left. And on top of that, Ansu and Ferran are just generally more natural goal scorers. Ansu especially has a habit of getting into these positions, and it makes a big difference. But when it comes to dribblers versus runners, it isn't necessarily true that one is better than the other. I will admit though, against a low block, I do like this emphasis on passing combinations and rotation, more than isolating wingers 1v1 against the fullback. That probably changes against an aggressive team that presses high, where those dribblers are better equipped to exploit space in behind. The good news is though that Xavi has both options, and this setup with the runners and movement clearly worked against what was at the time La Liga's best defence. Since we're talking about wingers and rotations, this is a good chance to answer another regular question, which is who should start at left back? Because no matter how often Jordi Alba seems done and dusted, he just comes back again. And this game was an example of the importance he still can give offensively, racking up an assist and being Barca's most threatening player from passes. So let's take a second to compare him to his main competition, young Alejandro Balde. The bottom line is simple. Alba is just the more proactive, both in terms of his positioning and in his ball use. Take a look at them side by side. This is Balde versus Elche and Alba versus Villarreal. So with Balde, you're seeing a lot of conservatism in possession, a lot of backwards passes from the left flank, and he really chooses his moments to put the ball into the box. Alba is very much the opposite, very expansive with his passing from deep as well as from the touchline, and of course that's enabled by having runners ahead of you on both flanks. What Balde does give you though is more progressive carries. You can see he likes to carry the ball into the box, whereas Alba almost never does. So what we're seeing actually is a similar comparison to what we looked at on the wingers with Ferran and Dembele, which is a passer slash runner versus more of a dribbler. And Alba, as the runner, is doing so all the time. And this is probably what sets him apart the most against Balde. Given any opportunity, Alba is making a run in behind. And usually the timing of these are very good. This level of dynamism is so important against a low block, where it's constantly a game of creating and exploiting space. And I talked about this in depth in both inter-game analyses, so if you're interested in understanding why that is, then check those out. But that's why offensively, purely in terms of chance creation and disrupting the opposition, Alba still has the upper hand, even if Balde is the more defensively responsible. So with that, we can shift focus slightly onto Barca as a defensive unit, and talk a bit more about Xavi's philosophy out of possession, and what he's trying to change to steady the weakest part of the ship. I've said it before and I'll say it again, Barcelona under Xavi inherently leave a lot of space in behind the defence, and that in itself is not a bad thing, although it is risky, and you can see that when Barca press high with the intention of keeping the ball in the opposition half, the perilous situation that will emerge if the opponents get out. But Xavi is wagering that it's worth the risk because of how infrequently teams will be able to access this space compared to how much Barca dominate the ball in the final third themselves. And generally he's right. With the most possession, the highest backline and the most aggressive press in La Liga, Barca have conceded the fewest chances and the lowest XG. The problem is that when that goes wrong, it goes very wrong, and there are two stages to mitigating that problem. Number one is possession and counterpress. So that's simply the more you keep the ball and the more numbers you have around it when it's lost, the better chance you have of winning it back immediately. That's why we're seeing a gradual shift from Xavi's team to become more control heavy. There were a lot of opportunities for Barca to be direct in this game with runners ahead of players on the ball, but they denied the opportunity to hit that space for the sake of control. And this was the case in the Real Madrid game as well. We know this is a direct order from Xavi because of his post-match comment. He said, "We talk a lot with the players about not always attacking the first time, about deciding well. That's why we talk about maturity. Today we even enjoyed it. Depending on how the opponent plays, you have to understand how to do it." And a big part of that is keeping the ball for the sake of being able to better control and counterpress. However, these things on their own aren't enough to stop all opposition threat. What happens, for example, if you're playing a team that's very good at playing through pressure, or something goes wrong in your pressing shape and the opponent gets in behind? Well, we saw the answer to that against both Real Madrid and Inter Milan. So the second part of mitigating the risk is knowing what to do when things go wrong. And that's heavily determined actually by the players you have at your disposal. Jules Koundé was an essential signing for Xavi exactly because of this reason. One, because he's an excellent athlete who can cover a lot of space, but also because he's comfortable defending in these scenarios. He's calm, composed, patient, and knows how to control space in a 1 versus 1 scenario. With a player like Koundé, even if your counter-press fails, you have an insurance policy, and when a certain Uruguayan returns from injury, that insurance doubles. So while some of the criticisms of Barca's defence are valid, the way Xavi wants to play does require a certain type of defender, and without them you're going to suffer. But there was a bigger problem against Real Madrid, who, as I said in that video, exposed Barca's man-to-man pressing scheme by being very wide and expansive, isolating Barca's midfielders, and giving them a lot of space to cover. And again, while Xavi would prefer that the ball never makes it into that space, against good opposition, it's inevitable that it will. So just for the sake of insurance, having athletic players who can cover space is valuable. And well, we got a good glimpse of a player with exactly that attribute, and playing in a role that many thought he would struggle in, me included. So let's finally take a look at the big talking point in this game, which is of course Frenkie de Jong in that pivot role. I have to say I'm surprised at the performance that we saw from Frenkie de Jong. Man of the match against Villarreal, and the most encouraging sign from this game if you're a Barca fan. It's clear to me that de Jong is making an extremely concerted effort to learn this pivot role and make himself a crucial part of this project going forward. Before this game, there were two big concerns I had of Frenkie in this role, and the first was defensively. While clearly he has athleticism and can cover that space that we talked about, the question was, could it be complemented with the right awareness of danger and aggressive ball winning? And in this game, the answer was emphatically yes. In transition, he was constantly sweeping up behind the front line, anticipating ball losses, positioning himself perfectly, and then being aggressive enough to win it back. And when it came to the press, he was also excellent. Villarreal are a good possession side, and like Real Madrid, they tried to be very expansive in order to isolate Barca's midfielders. But unlike Sergio Busquets, Frenkie de Jong had the intensity and athleticism to cover these large distances and not allow Villarreal to exploit the space. And this showed in the stats, with Frenkie de Jong making the most tackles and recovering the most balls out of anyone in a Barca shirt. Positioning and running are a given, but it was really the aggression and ball winning that was impressive. If Frenkie keeps this up and can replicate this type of performance against elite opposition, that is a complete game changer for this project. The second concern about the Frenkie pivot experiment was his ball usage, particularly with his tendency to hold on to it and carry rather than to move it quickly with progressive passes. But we saw a more balanced performance against Villarreal, and he used the ball quickly when he really needed to, especially in sort of early phase build-up, finding the interiors with just one touch when necessary. And when he didn't need to move the ball on this quickly, his ability to carry the ball can be as much of an asset as a detriment, especially against a deep block. So take the third goal, for example, where he's receiving as the free man between the lines. He has the option to break the lines himself with one of those progressive carries, disrupting the opposition shape and creating space. And that quality is also what makes him very press resistant in the early build-up. So does this mean it's problem solved and that Barca have their pivot for the next 10 years? Not exactly. The question marks remain over how he'll defend closer to his own box, especially against higher quality technicians. It was a problem I mentioned when he started against Real Sociedad, so up against elite teams he still has to answer those defensive concerns. In possession though, I am warming to the idea, and that midfield of Pedri, Gavi and de Jong is full of so much quality and energy, it's hard not to be excited about it. So what do you guys think? Is Frenkie de Jong the long-term answer for Barca as the pivot, or will he struggle when he has to do more ball winning in his own half? Let me know in the comments, and let me know what you think about the other points of discussion. The ideal winger setup, who starts at left back. I look forward to reading what you guys have to say. So I think we'll end with that. Thanks for watching. Subscribe, of course, for more of this, and I'll see you very soon. Take care.